Hi, everybody. As you file in, we want to welcome you to the afternoon and to our lovely panel today. I want to thank you for joining us for this Business of Architecture panel. As you get settled, a few housekeeping reminders. Please use the Q&A section for any questions today, and remember to be constructive in those questions or comments to the presenters and to one another to ensure that we have a session that is productive. Also, AIA California will submit one AIA learning unit for those who complete this session live. And as always, the webinar content and additional resources will be available online shortly after the session. Today's webinar will explore various phases in life cycles of firms, shed light on the synergies that have contributed to collective success, and a lot more. It qualifies for one AIA learning unit for those watching live, which AIA California staff will report for you once you have finished the session in full. Now to introduce our moderator. Fielding Featherston, AIA, is a principal and practice group leader at HGA in Los Angeles. His lifelong enthusiasm for architecture and business drives his work. Through these efforts, he leads initiatives focusing on project narrative development, process and critique, ensuring consistent feedback loops with project stakeholders and firm leadership. Welcome, Fielding. I'll hand it over to you now.
And my apologies for that delay. I was juggling windows. Thank you, Rebecca. You'll hear a little bit more about me later in the session. I think we'd like to throw it over to our panelists. So one by one, I'd like to introduce everybody, and then we'll dive in. So first we have Carrie Strickland, FAIA. She graduated from the University of Cincinnati with a Bachelor of Architecture in 1999. Since then, she has been at the forefront of innovative building practices and advancing equity in the architectural field. Launching Works Progress Architecture, WPA, in Portland, Oregon in 2005, Strickland built a business-savvy practice with a belief in the vitality and sustainability of urban centers, while proudly remaining 100% women-owned and majority women-staffed. Working predominantly in private development, Strickland masterfully manages high standards of design within tight budgets, fast-paced development, and jurisdictional restrictions associated with urban infill projects. In 2016, Strickland opened a sister studio, expanding on the work the firm was doing in the Los Angeles market. Continuing to challenge the contemporary norm with provocative modern designs, WPA is bringing the first high-rise tower to the Arts District and mass timber to the San Fernando Valley. Also with us today is Clayton Taylor, AIA. He holds a Master of Architecture degree from the University of California, Los Angeles, and a Bachelor of Architecture degree from California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo. The firm West of West, led by Clayton Taylor and Jai Kumaran, is an innovative architectural practice with a strong focus on relevant, contemporary, and meaningful architecture across the United States. Together, Clayton and Jai guide the creative direction of the 10-person practice. The name West of West captures the firm's ethos to look beyond the known horizon and consider what exists just out of sight. This perpetual curiosity and pioneering spirit permeate every aspect of West's practice. The studio's commitment to positively impacting the communities they serve is evident in their independent research and development of new models for housing, adaptive reuse of integral neighborhood structures, and experimental urban infill projects. By considering these projects as part of a broader design forward initiative, they aim to contribute to a more accessible, interconnected, and sustainable model for cities of the future. And also with us, Christopher Torres, RLA, is the founding principal and president of Agency Artifact and an award-winning landscape architect and urban designer, passionate about creating more equitable, resilient, and vibrant Los Angeles. He believes that urban design should be transparent and community-based. Chris is an active public speaker, researcher, and educator on topics related to public space and the future of cities. He was visiting researcher of urban design at the Queensland University of Technology, lecturer in landscape architecture and urbanism at USC, vice president of the LA Forum for Architecture and Urban Design, member of the Mayor Garcetti's Great Streets Design Advisory Committee, and has served on the board of the directors of the Landscape Architecture Foundation. He was appointed to serve as planning commissioner for the City of Los Angeles South LA APC. Chris holds a BA in Urban Studies from LMU, Master of Landscape Architecture from UC Berkeley, and training in urban design from Columbia University Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation. So thank you all for being here today. And now on to today's panel. Carrie, we're going to go right back to you. And I think we will, an interesting starting point here, now that we've gotten past the introductions, is to kind of look at where you are today, take a cross-section of your firm, and we'll use that as our departure point for the rest of the chat.
All right. Do you want to, I have those couple of image slides.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to share those. 1 second.
Yeah. While you're doing that, I'll start. As Fielding mentioned, I started the practice in Portland originally in 2005. At that time, as a very small startup, we were focusing mostly on adaptive reuse that then slowly grew into more ground up projects across a very wide spectrum of project types. You want to go to the next slide, Fielding? I have some images of some of that, our early Portland work, showing here B-side 6 on the left. This was our first ground up building contract that we were able to get in 2007. Ended up being the home of our Portland office for many years. Center top was a significant project for us. It's called Slate. It's a mixed use project that was our first type 1 building in Portland or kind of anywhere. And the other two images are images that reflect more of our early adaptive reuse work. The Olympic Mills on the right, a very large warehouse converted to creative office. And then the lower image is a small project of ours, again, seismic upgrade and adaptive reuse. So after several years, we did launch the LA office. And actually, you can go to the next slide. And actually had an office in Denver for a couple of years. The primary kind of method that we use, and we'll kind of all chat about that later, is we used our existing client relationships to really export what we were doing in Portland as a brand. We followed two existing clients, Stumptown Coffee and Central Office, which is a co-working space. Those were our first projects in the Los Angeles area, that then kind of grew into those larger relationships with some additional adaptive reuse and the high rise in downtown. What brought us to Denver initially was our relationship with AEG. We do a fair number of music venues with them across the country. And the first one happened to be in Denver and was part of a larger project that allowed us to really kind of take root in that market as well.
Great, thank you, Carrie. And here we'll also share the work of the other firms. So just resharing. 1 moment. Okay. Here we go.
Yeah.
All right, Clayton, you're up.
Yeah, I'll hop in here. Kind of an oddly story that's in reverse to what Carrie had done. We started in LA and moved to Portland a few years ago. So currently we operate 2 studios, Portland and Los Angeles. For us, the 2 studios are really one. Our projects are mixed back and forth and the team works back and forth. But we kind of exist in the 2 kind of design communities of Portland and Los Angeles. I live in Portland now and frequently in Los Angeles. And I also started my career with about 10 years of work down in LA. So I put a few different cut of how we position ourselves. So this next slide is kind of looking at where we started in Portland in 2016 with a 2-person office in a hallway, essentially, was kind of the first office space we had. So our current state at 2023, again, there's about 10 folks here in the Portland office. So just kind of a glimpse at how a studio grows from 2016 to 2023, as represented by the studio space itself. It's kind of part of that kind of goal for us is a big deal. So now again, we have an office in Portland and one in Los Angeles. The next slide really talks about that first wave of work. As everyone kind of knows, larger commercial projects take quite a while. So while a lot of these projects were acquired earlier on, some of them are just finishing. As we've gone through kind of economic cycles and long-term builds and kind of reframing how we've moved through those. So our work really has gone kind of from boutique retail to kind of larger adaptive reuse commercial interior work to more ground up projects. All these things are sort of happening simultaneously, but they all finish sort of at different times. And the work spans different cities from Los Angeles to Portland to Austin. And again, the similar thing that I hope we discuss a bit more is how we talk about small studios as they kind of migrate to other cities and bring expertise and kind of build relationships across city boundaries as they kind of focus on finding the agenda of the practice. The third slide here, or the kind of final slide here, is just kind of our kind of next wave of thoughts and how we're looking at speculation in our office as a way to kind of lead the work we want to be pursuing. Again, being a small office that has a number of projects built, but a lot of big ideas. It's kind of how do you translate those ideas into the work you want to get? And that's kind of where we're at right now, is how we kind of speculate and kind of map our way towards our kind of next wave of projects. And that's kind of another subtopic we can get into in the discussion.
Great, thank you, Clayton.
Yeah.
And Chris, let's throw it over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Fielding, and thanks everyone who's attending. Really appreciate it, taking some time out of your day. So my name is Chris Torres. I'm the founder of Agency Artifact, and we're a landscape architecture and urban design practice based out of Los Angeles. I get to be the one non-architect here, which is always fun. And our work really moves between different disciplines. My interest has always been somewhere between the lines, between architecture, between landscape, between ecologies and cities, and Artifact is really bringing those worlds together. So if we go to the next slide, this talks just a little bit about some of our firm ethos. So we are really focused on cultural work. I've been fortunate to collaborate with many different types of firms, and I think that's something we'll talk a little bit more about later today, is that collaboration really as a means of business development. We get to work with all kinds of architects or planners or other kind of allied professions, and that kind of grows our impact. So this is work that I did with Disney Imagineering in Shanghai. We go to the next slide. We love building projects. We do quite a bit of planning work, and it's something we'll also talk a little bit about, is that the kind of pipeline of working in planning, but with a long-term vision that those will become construction projects and those become design contracts. This is a built work of a hospital in Pasadena that we did with co-architects. We'll go to the next slide. We love the big idea. That is really kind of what we sell. We sell creativity, and that has no boundaries in terms of disciplines. So fortunate to work with artists. This is work with E.J. Hill at Mass MoCA, a roller coaster you could ride on as a visitor to the museum after you sign a long NDA. And then just the last few slides here. We do quite a bit of outreach. So really working with the communities on the ground to understand their ambitions. And then finally, last two here, the idea of a more equitable public realm. At the end of the day, that's what our firm is trying to create. This is the Sepulveda Basin Vision Plan here in Los Angeles. This is a 2,000-acre site with multiple architects, multiple landscape architects and engineers coming together. And then the last slide is talking a little bit about a new venture that we really saw a gap in the idea of how do you build a city. And it's kind of a crazy, audacious statement. And so we have a strategic partnership with a firm called Somos that is a law practice that does pre-development, does everything here you see on the right, from planning to advocacy, policy work, strategy work, government relations. We were able to lobby at the state and at the federal level. And so the idea of to build a city, you really need a whole team. So now we're kind of much more closely aligned with professionals that share the same values. So this idea of team building, collaboration, really as a means to grow and amplify your practice is something that we're really leaning into.
Great, thank you, Chris. All right, well, now that we've gotten the introductions passed, I think it'd be interesting, and we can take it back to you, Carrie. You know, looking at departure points and maybe when you were starting your firm back in the day, you know, I guess give us a snapshot of, you know, what your goals were with the practice at that time, and then maybe just in some ways shape that, how that may have evolved, you know, between then and now.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think the one thing that I should say at the beginning of that statement is that there is always a continuum, and that's always evolving based on kind of how things end up showing up for you or where you're showing up for others. I think at the beginning of the practice, it was very much it was focused in that adaptive reuse. I had kind of brought existing relationships to the table. It was very much focused on planning, code interpretation, and kind of generating new opportunities in at the times the Central East Side, which is the industrial district in Portland. And then as that had kind of taken foot, I guess, gotten a foothold, I think the larger goal now has definitely shifted to seeing how we can export those initial ideas, understanding that there was a uniqueness to our approach, and trying to work hard to kind of get that out there into different jurisdictions, different cities, in different project types.
And Clayton, I guess similar question for you. You know, when you and your two-person hallway office were getting started, what was in your head at that time?
I think it was kind of funny. Like the practice is really between me and Jai Kumar as partners, and we met each other in undergrad, and then went to grad school together, and then worked together professionally in LA. So we have like a very long-term partnership even before West to West started. So we had the ambitions of creating a practice, and it was about when are we going to do that, and when do we feel like we have the right energy, projects, client relationships, everything to kind of make that happen. So we were looking for a moment for that to start from a very early period. But that kind of presented itself in a way that we didn't think. You know, we started the practice doing a lot of small scale interior work, which we had never done before starting the practice. So we were doing more kind of larger building work. So I think when we started, it was, hey, here's a point where we believe we can you know, add value to a project, you know, at a small scale, but our thinkings and our ambitions were kind of at the full scale building level. And so for the first few years, it was like, how do you bridge together your ambitions and then your on the ground ability to take down a project like that, right? So so the practice is kind of scaled with those contracts and those types of client opportunities over the years. And I think that's kind of the first 5 years of the practice, is like scaling to the point where you want it to be. And the kind of like what Carrie was saying, like the kind of modern thinking sort of plateaued. You think about, well, what's next? And I think that's about more of, you know, understanding what West to West is capable of and what we're excited about and what our ambitions are. You know, we started with some ambitions, but I think it took us kind of going through the process of creating a practice and working with folks and building a team and all that kind of stuff to really understand what it can really do and where we want to go. And now we're kind of forecasting more, well, we want to be into this specific type of work, and we feel like we have some ideas in this level. We want to go find other partners, clients, collaborators that are sharing that ambition to do something kind of on that line, right? So it's a little bit of like, you know, building up and then now forecasting and trying to kind of catch where you want to go. So you sort of feel more in control of it now, I guess, than when you started. So if that's one way to look at it.
No, thank you, Clayton. Well,
Yeah.
Chris, you know, I've had been fortunate to work with you on and off the last 5 years through kind of several iterations of practice for you. So I guess tell us where it started.
the idea of just having my own practice, essentially.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah, yeah.
similar question, the goals at that time.
Yeah, I think the goals have kind of been consistent of creating a platform to advocate for the ideas that I think need to happen. And so that's always been a consistent kind of thread, I think, through different roles. And so my history is that I actually worked with Clay. We worked together way back, which is
Yeah.
cool. Worked in many different practices, both local and kind of global and international firms, and launched my first practice in 2015 with 2 business partners, ran that practice for a few years, and then actually merged that with an architecture firm called the Jurdy Partnership, which is like a large scale retail driven practice. And that got me around the world. So that got me working throughout Asia and South America, throughout North America, and showed me the ability to really think at kind of a real civic scale. And then in the middle of COVID started Artifact as really the ambition to create a platform for that level of thinking in really our local context. So, I mean, I'll really even speak locally to Los Angeles. The work we're doing now is focused on California, but with ambition to work in any area. And I think what we really see is a gap between the ability to scale ideas and understanding not only the talent you need to do that, but the deep understanding of the policies and frameworks and economics behind making those ideas real. And so that is where we live. That's the space that we put ourselves in. It's not always the easiest space, but it allows us to really kind of fully advocate for an idea and see an idea all the way through.
Great. Well, one question I have is, for Carrie and Clayton, is you have practices that originated in one city and expanded to another, and that ultimately has resulted in a presence as well. And I guess that type of growth, like how was it spurned? Was it a project specific initiative, or was it a goal to be in that city that got you there? Either one of you interested in kind of leading this, because it's an interesting discussion on this idea of being hyper local, and I think we can elaborate that on that through your. We'll start with you, Carrie.
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned in my intro, I think there was a small notion a few years into the initial practice in Portland, where I started thinking about what are the benefits from having another location. And honestly, like in my mind, I grew up in Ohio. I'm from the Midwest, and in my mind, it was always like, oh, Chicago. So Portland and Chicago, those seemed like 2 great cities to have practices within. And again, not really knowing yet how that would kind of take shape in the end. So for us, it was definitely, we had 2 clients at the same time that were really looking to expand in the Southern California market. And when Stumptown, we had just done a really big project with them where they had consolidated all of their production and headquarters and kind of marketing and sales team in Portland. And they needed that same thing in LA. And they happened to, really be focused in the arts district because it allowed them to set up that roastery. So really digging in and following them into this market. And I think based on some of the work that I had already done in Portland, you show up in the arts district, and it was such a strong parallel and like building stock and kind of how those 2 districts were initially kind of envisioned and what they were becoming with creative influence. So I started having conversations locally about that and really drawing strong parallels between what we had done in the Central East Side and Portland, and that kind of snowballed. So it's interesting because I think about like LA to me still seems it's very insular and a bit of a closed circuit. Like people are really more, they're really comfortable working with the folks and the creatives that they have worked with for a long time. So I think for me, trying to find something unique or special about how I approach design and architecture and influence in a neighborhood or a city was my only calling card at the beginning. Is because like there are lots of great designers in both cities, and so really trying to find kind of the crack in the wall to squeeze through, which was that kind of industrial district knowledge.
Clayton,
Yeah.
how about you?
Yeah, kind of again related, but sort of in reverse. We were in LA for quite a while, both Jai and I, and we were looking to leave LA and open our practice in another city. But we really wanted to stay on the West Coast. So it was to try and find a little bit, to some degree, from a lifestyle standpoint and a practice standpoint, a contrasting city to Los Angeles. And it's not so much the style of the city, but kind of where the city's at in its growth, right? Portland is and at the time we moved up here is kind of an interesting emerging metropolis to some degree. It's a pretty small town, but it's kind of growing in a lot of different ways. And there's a big architectural role in that, I'd say. And we felt that, you know, by being here, we could kind of be part of that. Where LA is, again, different life cycle of LA. It's in its own kind of mix, as we all know. And so we were looking at how an office of our size, a small office, can kind of be in the mix of a very large city and a very kind of localized city. And again, the same kind of things was like, we had a ton of resources and clients in LA. When we first moved up here, it was like people kind of connecting us in, and we were seen as a viable outsider that could do different work. So it was kind of a fun way to you know, provide. We were kind of a contrasting design figure to other folks that were around. So it's that was kind of how things started, I'd say, and now there's a lot of weird similarities between the two cities, and that's like where the discussion of design happens in our studios now. Like if you're doing a hotel in LA or doing a hotel in Portland, like yes, it's the typology is there, and you know there's some similarities, but there's very different takes on how those projects manifest in those cities. And I think when you start to study them and discuss them on those lines, it becomes very fascinating. So as we grew, we took on more projects outside of all those cities. So Seattle and a bunch of work in Austin. Our biggest built project right now is in Austin. And then more work in Oakland, a bunch of retail in New York. We kind of kept kind of looking at this kind of comparative analysis of cities and the projects we're working on and how they kind of relate. And there was a lot of client relationships around that kind of were leading these discussions, you know, like simple things like, how does bike parking work in Portland? Oh, that's really interesting. Austin's really coming out with regulations in that. How do you like, how does that manifest in a building, you know? So there's a ton of little things. I think the biggest one now is like small lot or kind of infill housing in the suburban fabric, you know, how LA is dealing with that versus how Portland's dealing with that. How regulations are tracking between those two. So we've now kind of seen ourselves as this kind of comparative analysis studio between the two cities versus being fully a Portland studio or a LA studio. I think the kind of hybrid city approach for a small studio is super fascinating. It also allows us to kind of really look at, I guess, even economically, how the two cities are changing and how are we shifting between that. And how we can kind of develop our personal, I think it's basically kind of forced us to kind of really figure out who we are, not just who we are in one city or the other, but how do you kind of be this satellite office theoretically, kind of between two locations. So it's been kind of it was an odd jump in the beginning, but it's kind of been a very healthy way for us to kind of think more holistically about what we do and how it impacts the places where we're working, you know, on the local level or in the city level or whatever it is. So yeah, I think that addresses it.
Yeah, I mean, an interesting way, you know, we reference hyperlocal as an idea, but you're hyperlocal at a large scale, and which is an interesting, I think, way to think about it. And you know, is that a question or a concern of your clientele or potential clientele in terms of your physical presence, or are they just mostly interested in you, the ideas in that specific project?
Yeah, I think we talked, and maybe Clayton and I have talked about this a little bit, but I think what's interesting for us is like currently, you know, jumping between those two cities initially, now we have projects in 9 different states in the US and, you know, a project in Germany. And I think that I know early on when we started first having conversations with people kind of outside of our immediate area, there was a concern about, well, you know, do you need a local person? Do you need someone to help interpret this X, Y, Z? And I think that more we have kind of proven ourselves and built those skills around the ability to drop into a situation, really understand the context, get to know the key kind of concerns, parties, that community, and then saying, hey, we have this knowledge, we can export that, we can come in and we can bring you a fresh perspective. So I see it as a blend between that hyper local idea of really getting to know something, but then also being able to kind of sell somebody on what you're actually bringing in that maybe the local community isn't even thinking about because they're living it every day.
Yeah. I think kind of a similar thing. I think the kind of dropping in and learning, I think we've also found how our practice shifts as we like when we went to Austin, you know, the building we did in Austin was a west to west building emerging in Austin. It wasn't just a west west building showing up, right? And I think that kind of allowing the context of where you're working to influence how you work and being super open to that, I think is really critical as well. I feel like there's a discussion here with Chris as well, because Chris works in so many different circles with different stakeholders involved as well. There's something about, you know, bringing something, but also equally kind of absorbing and sort of shifting with the group and finding others that are interested in that kind of grown relationship that comes out of a project when it enters a different city or a different location or whatever. And I think that's how, again, it can appear as though, oh, you're coming from someplace else and you're doing a project here, what do you know of it? It's like, well, that's definitely the case, but we're finding partners and we're really understanding the story kind of analytically and not just what's currently known. So I think part of that coming in from the outside or working in other cities, I think gives you a different perspective. But again, it's not just jamming the project we have across and scaling it like a franchise situation. It's really, how do you kind of settle, I think, in the city or settle in that site? And it's allowed, again, I think that doing that, I think allows you to become more flexible, and but not just in the design project. I'm talking about the whole business structure itself. Like how do you listen really well when you go in a room of people in Austin, Texas that you've never met before, you know, and try and work with everyone and not just come in and, you know, here's my project, you know, let's build it. It's like, what are we all trying to do here? You know, so there's something flexible in that I think is important to talk about.
Yeah, I think something that I've seen with Artifact and other practices I've been fortunate to be part of is when you're working in a new context, the ability to demonstrate, the ability to show outcomes versus services. And that's like the distinction that we would think a lot about, that if you go into a market and you are trying to sell yourself as a service provider, you're never going to be that local. You're never going to know everything that the practitioner that's been in that space for their whole life, their whole career. And at the end of the day, your value is to show different kind of outcomes, that a whole other approach, but then being able to carry through on those outcomes with a team of consultants and subs that are local, that understand the space. Like that distinction is really, really critical. And when you feel yourself leaning towards the service side, you essentially become a commodity, and then you can be priced. And then you're like priced out. And that's when fees start coming into the discussion. But when you start bringing in an outcome-based approach, it allows you to work anywhere.
And Chris, is that, you know, in kind of approaching these collaborations together with other firms, be it other people in the landscape space or architecture, are you ever, or do you ever see yourself as part of kind of a thrust or an effort to break ground in a new city? Like, have you been pulled into that
Definitely
more often than not? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's about just having a posture of collaboration, and more like an active collaboration. Like we use the phrase like thought partners a lot. And so that in terms of like moving into a new city or a new project typology. So there's firms that we worked with, it's like their first educational project. It's their first public space project. Like that's almost as big of a shift as it is trying to move into a new jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And one question for the group, and this is coming in the Q&A that's just kind of chatting along in the background, and this is open to anybody. How do you work towards the projects you want if you don't yet have the experience as you're doing all of this?
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry.
I have like, yeah, two things to say about it, I guess. But I think early on, I didn't really realize the value of coming with some ideas, you know, like a speculative project or something that you can actually show. So I think there is, when you approach a new project or a project you've never done before, I think there is a moment for either you or your office or your studio of folks who work together on the project, is like, what are the values that we're trying to go for on this? It's kind of like, why are we doing this to begin with, you know, versus we want to acquire the business and we want to get it going and, you know, whatever. But, you know, I think as we've taken on some newer typologies, it's been like hotel, for example. It's like, how, like, what do we think of this? What's our kind of pillars of this project? For us starting there to kind of know what's either creatively at stake before the contract's at stake, you know, like, what are we trying to kind of carry, I think is really important. And that to us, that's done through the process of discussion of this within the studio, or trying to kind of work through a couple projects, even just like sketch projects on the side that are kind of ways to kind of work through ideas and then bring something to that before there's a true actual project at stake. But I think it's important basically to kind of understand why you're approaching the project, and find things in that you can actually talk with others about. Because now, if I understand why I want to do a hotel and I go talk to somebody who builds a bunch of hotels, I can say, hey, this is what I think is kind of interesting, or this is something that I if kind of inspired by, and we want to try to do this. Versus, you know, I'm an architect, I build things, we should build a hotel, you know, like it's try to build the ambitions that you can discuss with others and build that community of ideas, I think is important.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. And I think that the other approach to that is to find, you know, other creative partners that have more experience in that way. And I say that as I'm going to have to hop off here in a second, but for instance, we don't have, because so much of our work came out of private development, we don't have a lot of kind of civic or public project experience. So when we find something that is enough of a parallel there that we can kind of see some of those shared threads, we will partner with someone that does bring that to the table. You know, today I'm partnered up with Brenda Levin, and we're about to go interview for a civic project that I don't think I would have ever got shortlisted for had I not really, you know, had that relationship and kind of build those connections and are able to show how we can work really creatively together. Again, I apologize that I have to hop off early, but.
Oh, thank you, Carrie. We appreciate
Yeah.
you being here.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Go win that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, bye.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know, when it comes to, you know, multiple locations and studios, and then I'm pulling this from the Q&A, Clayton, like, how do you structure the firm from a leadership standpoint when you're dealing with a couple of different offices, and even when you're maybe reaching, at least on a temporary basis, as far as Austin and running something like that? How does that work within your group?
Well, I do think, just to kind of cut down, the biggest part of it is the scale of the studio. You know, right now we're a 10-person studio. That means that half the studio is a project leader level and the other half is kind of design level. So there's kind of like a lot of independent kind of leadership within projects to some degree. So that helps us. I think if we were a bit bigger and there was more going on, I think it's a little hard to not have, I think the bigger you get, I think the more structure and kind of hierarchy you need within how that kind of day-to-day flow of things are. So right now, Jai and I are both in Portland, and then one of us will go to LA, or we'll both go to LA, we'll flip back and forth. But predominantly right now, we really trust our project leaders as they're running projects and building our collaborative lists of people and things like that. So it's kind of like, and that's sort of where we started with the practice, was West of West doesn't have our names on it for a reason. It's supposed to be kind of a creative umbrella for lots of great talent to kind of be pursuing work under that. So that's kind of how we've been doing it right now. When we're in the cities from afar, we're most of the design work and things like that is kind of happening back and forth. And then when a project goes in construction, we're there, a couple times a month usually for a few days and kind of monitoring stuff. So I think, yeah, the hardest part is really when it goes into construction and really monitoring stuff. But again, most of the work we do, we're finding contractors through pre-con relationships. So we're really building a relationship with that contractor from the beginning, like during DD, basically. So again, it's everyone knows a small, the business that we're all in is really a collaborative art in itself, between the contractors and the subs and other design partners, things like that. So we are constantly building a constellation of people around the project that we are trusting, to help run it. Either that's landscape group or some of the smaller scale retail stuff we've done. The team that's building casework is like our golden goose. Like if we can find a great casework or millwork sub, then we know things are going to be okay. So I think doing from kind of smaller, like 1,000 square foot interior to 250,000 square foot ground up building, on that side, that's the concrete sub who we're really focused on, right? So we're trying to really build that group of partners on the project that help and trust us from afar, and they know how we're coming into the thing. I think it's kind of foolish to think that the architect, in my opinion, the architect is the only one that knows everything. That's not the case. We're building a bridge, and that's kind of the strongest thing you can do throughout the life cycle of the project. So that's kind of my short answer, I guess. Maybe kind of longish answer is have good people around the project to help.
And does that extend to even as you're branching out into other cities that are, based on project work? Is it a similar style of connection with those local municipalities, the authorities having jurisdiction over the work?
Yeah, it is. I think one thing that is, it is a lot to get into a new city and learn jurisdictional hurdles that might exist. And again, some cities have some pretty deep, just entitling a project can be a pretty steep climb. It is in Portland. So usually we're having local clients or someone kind of help us with that a little bit, or we're kind of towing into it a little bit and doing our research that way. But again, these things don't happen overnight. I mean, like Eastbound, the one in Austin I keep referring to, that was, I think, a year of probably 18 months of design and then 2 years of building. So, that's a pretty long period and a lot of trips to Austin and learning a lot about, what was going on and what we're getting into and meeting people along the way and being supportive of all that during that process. So I think it's like small building blocks that kind of lead to those great kind of further away projects, I'd say.
And Chris, you've I know in partnership with you in the past, sometimes, you have kind of maintained a critical community connection that was essential to the project's success, or obviously you've borne those relationships that would be helpful in either winning or making the project a success if it has already been won. Do you find yourself being kind of pulled into those partnerships frequently for that reason, or is that one of many, many other reasons?
No, I think so. I mean, we know that it takes a whole village basically to make a project happen. It's a intentional way of how we work, and ultimately comes back to understanding your client's needs. And every client's going to have a certain desire. And also, every person running a project is going to have a different interest and desire. And I mean that at like a personal level. Like, who is this person that's hiring you? Is he a vice president and he wants to be a senior VP? And in order to grow in his career, these things need to happen. I think you need to know those things. You need to identify who these people are just as people, and then build a team around their success, because ultimately their success is your success. And so it's interesting when we first started, when I first started my own practice, trying to get meetings with who I thought were decision makers. So like the C-suite, like CEO level, like large development firms, and I would email and call and see if I knew anyone that knew anyone to like try to get me an introduction, and like went nowhere. And then it was like realizing that was like I don't need to know those people. I need to know the people that are my age working in those companies and get to know them. And fast forward years later, all those folks are now decision makers running those firms and able to pull us into projects. So it was a bit of a humbling experience, but also an encouraging experience to know that like the version of you exists in your clients. You just need to find those people. And in one way that was super helpful, just throwing out my personal experience, was getting involved locally, just through different organizations like ULI. AIA also does incredible work pulling together different working groups, but ULI is also great because it's multidisciplinary. So there are many different kind of groups and meetings that I attended where I was the only designer in the room. So it's like kind of a no-brainer.
And do you think, and for both of you, do you find yourself kind of to play off what you just said, Chris, are you aligning yourself with younger companies or with emerging firms that, may in some ways be mirroring the growth of your own practices in terms of where it is in its lifespan now?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we're able to support each other, right? But what's always amazing to me is how quickly your network will change and grow even with nothing happening on your end. So like people will grow, they'll get a new job and they'll move up, or they'll take a job at a large development company, or they'll become a city manager. And so it's just finding your community where they're at, just being an authentic person and understanding how you could help each other. And that was kind of the basis of business design. The basis of business development I was taught was helping others. Like if you could find a way to help someone, fantastic. And that is going to just pay dividends in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think kind of a similar vein to that, I think about either the age thing or just, I think finding shared ground with folks as you meet them is important. And sometimes that shared ground doesn't exist, and maybe that's not a relationship that's going to necessarily lead to anything for either party, and that's totally fine as well. I think earlier on in my career, I was like, okay, everyone's possibly a client. Let's make this work. I think it's okay to meet people, and it's not the best fit, and that's okay. So I think respecting that, but I think finding shared resources is good. And in a similar sense, like the last few years for us, it's been about, we have a series of kind of unbuilt ideas that we think are really important, and we want to find others that share those ideas. So our method of doing that is through some of the unbuilt awards we've won and some of the publications we've been in more recently. So that's given us kind of this is the kind of West of West project group, and we're using that as kind of like, this is us. Like if that's kind of like our little magnet we're putting out there, as a way to maybe find others that share those ideas about infill housing or small lot development, or whatever it may be. And I think that's kind of been the more recent arc, is like the idea led, or the speculative focus of, here's what I think we can do with this type of project. Who's with me, kind of thing. And it's like, how do you find that stage to kind of get that to happen? I think it's earlier in my career, I was like, oh, you have to build a great building and then you just got to get it published, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's definitely the case too, but it takes a very long time, especially when you're a young studio. But you've still had your whole career to build ideas and build discussion around your work, and you've met studio partners or people in school or people at work that you've been able to build a bridge on. Like that's how Chris and I met years and years ago, with having an interest in urbanism and how that's developing in LA. And we've talked ever since because of that kind of shared ground, you know. And I think when you start to say, like, either try to look for shared ground or put something of yourself out there, I think that allows others to kind of join in that discussion. I think is an avenue as well that I think works, at least for us.
I think sorry, building. I think it is. I really do echo with the your reflection, Clay, on like there's going to be some people you're going to meet that are just not going to take you anywhere in terms of a project, but that's okay.
Yeah.
And also learning more to try to identify like who's a decision maker. Like there's different types of people in organizations. There's people that are just doing their job and that's all they're going to want to do, and that's okay. But asking them, like, you know, who's the person that might actually make that decision? Like, is there any way I could get an introduction? And just kind of asking for what you want is maybe some of the best advice that I'm always trying to do better with.
And you know, Chris, I know, and Clayton, this question's for you as well. You know, as your practices are maturing and growing, obviously you're bringing in more staff. You know, obviously you're not huge firms, but you are increasing the number. Where is that putting you in terms of a level of comfort with maybe some of the more granular decisions being made that affect the work? And, you know, I mean, I know in the earlier days, Chris, it was you and me on meetings, and it was you that represented you. And now I'm meeting with your team these days. So
yeah.
Where are you with that? And is there opportunity in that just as you evolve?
I'll kind of tie back to what Clay was mentioning about how he like intentionally didn't call his practice like Clayton Taylor Architects. Because yeah, it's about a bigger idea. And I think something that we're always looking for in our team is that we have really clear alignment with that idea. That's kind of like maybe the most critical thing, that we share that North Star, and that trickles through in terms of our work and our commitment to excellence and design excellence. So I feel very confident with any of our team stepping into a meeting, going in front of a client. I mean, we even will, like we were working on a really incredible project with Frank Gehry's office, and we had our intern present some of the ideas. And so I think he was terrified, but we had it. It was great. It was fun.
So that's a good experience to like jump in there. Oh,
and
man.
Yeah, so I think that's critical, and I think that's part of the culture that we want to continue to grow.
I think I wish someone would have told me a long time ago, is we had to figure it out a little bit, was you start a practice and like you're in charge of it. And it's like you and your partner and another person, you know, and you're like, oh, I got to model this thing. I got to draw this thing. I got to check this detail. I got to do this, got to do that. I think that is necessary when you're a small office, just because you kind of need to cover a lot of ground with few people. But as you scale just a little bit above that, delegating tasks is important, but also empowering your team so that they know they can lead a discussion or present something or discuss something or make a call on something, like the granular decision thing. So I think it's a bit of like setting the framework of what is the kind of design agency at large what are we trying to achieve as a goal? So we talk about that a lot. But then also, you know, step back for a second and let your team kind of do what they're really good at, you know. There was I think bringing on folks that, you know, at some point you're also gonna be hiring people that are much smarter and better than you know. So like you need to be able to let that happen. And I think where we're at now, which has been pretty good, is, you know, we have some of our team are like pursuing a couple RFPs that they're like, hey, this is something I think we should go after. I'm like, I'm fully, if you're down for it, I'm down for it. Let's go. And it's not coming from the partners so much. So I think that's a kind of cool moment when the ideas of the practice are clear enough that others can take those and kind of travel with them a little bit. I think that's really, really important. Yeah.
And I think just adding on to that, I think something that's always critical is like the systems you put in place so that people just, you know, where the resources are. So you could do it. You're not literally just, I think we probably all worked in offices that didn't have those systems, and we're just like, yeah, do it. And you're like, okay, to start from scratch. I think that's something that maybe the kind of next generation of designers really understands the value in that. And we're always also thinking about how we could leverage technology to be able to help us do that more as well.
Yeah.
Well, we have a number of questions that have popped up over the course of this chat, and I don't know if we can hit all of them, but I'll throw a couple to you, and we'll see if we can get some answers to the audience today. What are some of the other examples of roadblocks you ran into when you were getting your firm off the ground? And, pick any one of those. How did you end up dealing with them?
How many do we want to talk about? Let's see. I think maybe a real honest one, I think, is as you start a practice, nobody knows who you are. And then you're trying to have people work with you and trust you a little bit, and you trust them, right? So that initial moment of trying to first hire somebody or first couple people that are joining the practice, I think it's no small feat. It's something that if you do it with respect and grace as you hire someone, and they are kind of joining in with you to do this thing, I think that's a big deal. I remember, like, when I was younger, joining other practices, and you're like, oh, I don't know anything, I'm here. You remember those moments when you started your career and what you're looking for. I think as you bring people to practice, like, how are you helping folks kind of grow, and that I think is a big deal. So for us, it was hiring's always been a bit of a trick earlier on. Now that we have a little more recognition, it's a little bit better, but it's like they're going to go with West to West or Gensler. It's like, that's two very different worlds. You're not competing, even though someone's making a decision where they want to work. So I think that's a trick, is how do you represent yourself to your staff and to your potential staff or people that you're going to be designing with. I think it's a big deal. I think so. My way of removing the roadblock or thinking about the roadblock is just to be very thoughtful of that stuff, and understand that it's a hurdle that needs to be crossed, I guess. We thought we would just put an ad out and someone would just show up like next day and we'd be good to go. That's not the case. And then as we've grown, it's building a much more robust employment package for the team, and 401k, healthcare, like all those things that come with it, right? But that was all about looking for great people that want to work with us, and we've got to really step up to that call. So that's my role.
How about you, Chris?
I think for us, a lot of it's kind of been a bit of a breakthrough in the last year or so of like the scale of work. When you leave an established practice, you're working on huge scale projects, and then you start your practice, and then, like Clay was saying, like, I'm doing 1,000 square foot interior, like that, the jump is really hard. And how do you find your way back into maybe a scale where you think you work best? And so I think the traditional trajectory is it's a long and slow, right? You're just going to put in your years and just keep going, and one day maybe it'll work. And I think for me, that just wasn't acceptable. I didn't want to do that. And so we had to really think creatively of like, okay, if we want to do, for us, it's really public work, it's public space. If we really want to do civic scale projects, how do we do that? And so we wanted to work directly with the city of LA. So to be able to get on like an on-call list is really hard. Like to get on an on-call list for any municipality, you have to show that you've already been on an on-call list with another municipality. So it's like, well, how does this work? And so what we did on this Sepulveda Basin project, one of the images I showed was we actually partnered with another landscape architecture firm, with the Olin partnership, who are fantastic and good friends. And we have a 2,000 acre site, so there's plenty of room to work with. And it's been fantastic, like the partnership and working alongside each other, a young, small firm, an established legacy firm. There's plenty of work, there's plenty of fee to share. And I think the client at the end of the day has seen a ton of value in getting those different perspectives. So So that's something that we're totally open to, that I think, but to do that, you have to drop this myth that there's going to be one person drawing this thing. You got to let that go and like totally let go of your ego and just have a posture of service. So that has been kind of interesting for us, and it's something that we're pursuing more of. Like, we could do the work we want to do today. It's just going to look a little different than it would in a traditional firm. And then that was a challenge and a breakthrough. I think we're up on time, actually, right?
Yeah, I think we're running right up on it.
Yeah.
Rebecca, do we keep going or do we have to cut it here at 1 o'clock?
Just for the sake of time, we do want to cut it. We do have some folks that are already hopping off as well, but want to make sure that they get their CE for their hour that they've been here, and definitely appreciate the panelists. So thank you very much.
No, thank you, Clayton, Chris, obviously to Carrie as well for taking the time today. I mean, tons of questions have resulted from this discussion that I wish we had time to answer, but I think I absolutely, you know, given how accessible you've been to me over the last couple of years of getting to know you, I think all panelists might entertain these questions if you reach out to them. They're very easy to get in touch with through their websites and have all their contact information there. But thank you again for appearing today, and thank you to the audience for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks Fielding for organizing and
Yeah, I
getting
appreciate it.
together. Really appreciate.
Yeah,
Thank you.
seeing you guys.
You
Bye-bye.
guys. Bye.